Hello and welcome to another edition of ISG Smarktalks, the podcast where we try to educate, to inspire and entertain our listeners on how technology is transforming businesses. So today's topic, which I hope you'll find interesting, is the world of networks. So the plumbing that connects billions of devices together, whether that's fixed, mobile, software-defined networks, 3G, 4G, 5G. Networks really connect us and enable our digital lives to work. So they are very important. So we thought it would be good to learn a little bit more about them. So I'm delighted to be joined by two experts in the field. So Phil Hugus and John Harrod, both colleagues of mine at ISG. So gentlemen, can I get you to introduce yourselves? Let me start with you, John.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. I lead up the ISG Network advisory practice, so supporting our clients on ideally their network transformations, answering the queries on commercial, technology, strategy and financial approaches to essentially make the most of their network services today and ultimately going forward.
Excellent. How long have you been involved in the field?
In the field, it must be, without trying to give away my age, going on for a good 25 years. I started out in global operations for American Express, running their data network services. Moved on to IBM Global Services and actually worked in the Netherlands for 12 years, rolling out in those days what were MPLS type networks. Moved on into AT&T, and then following AT&T had a short break with General Electric, migrating data centers into the networks for a bit of change of scenery and a change of flavour, and then ultimately joined ISG.
Wow.
Been with ISG 12 years now, again running network service practice.
Yeah, you see, and I worked with you and I had no idea you had that level of experience, but very impressive. And my other colleague, Mr. Hugus. So Phil, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks, Barry. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me in. Phil Hugus, I'm a partner with ISG. I'm responsible for our research practice here in Europe. Yes, I have the funny accent, 6 months over in London now, having a smashing time looking after our research practice and helping John out with a little bit of the network sourcing practice. Inside our research organization, we have a group of folks called Carrier Advisory that look after research in the telecom space. We produce some pretty interesting and deep research on what's going on in the world of networks. So between John and I today, we ought to have the subject pretty well covered.
Yeah, and I would imagine we have best part of 40 or 50 years worth of experience in this.
Exactly,
in
20
this
years. I'm an old telecom guy by trade, 20 years with NCI, and then the last 14 with ISG or related companies. I ran our network practice for 10 years. And the last couple of years looking after our research business. So excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining me today. So let's just start with some definitions, because we may have listeners who really aren't familiar with the world of networks. When we say network, when we talk about telecommunications, what do we mean exactly? Are there different types of networks? Is there fixed and is there mobile and wireless? What's the difference? One of you just set the scene for me so we can get some definitions out there.
The difference is really the medium that the data's transported over. So fixed networks for myself is more terrestrial networks, so land-based networks that can cover your fibre optics, running on copper, satellites. You can even look at your microwave connections. Things now obviously moving wireless. You've had 3G, which wasn't that effective, but it started opening up the world and started the deployment of smartphones, for example. 4G, which everyone should be using today, which really has been an enabler for mobile computing, mobile business. And then obviously we've got 5G networks, which is also wireless delivered by the telcos, and that's going to open up the industry no end with new possibilities. It's definitely not the answer to everything. There's still a requirement for fixed lines, data centers, replication, for example. It's just more efficient to use land-based services in certain instances compared to your wireless handset connectivity off your mobile phone.
Cool, thank you. I'll talk a bit more about 5G later, because I know there's a lot of hype, and I'd be really interested to understand what's hype and what's reality. But so, Phil, the way telecommunications and networks is sort of handled or managed and governed in the US, very different to the way it's managed in the UK, where we're sitting right now, right? But some of the service providers are the same, and some are very different. Give us a flavour for who's who in the market.
Well, I think most people recognize the large firms. So, in the UK, BT, Vodafone, Colt. Then you have Orange in France, the Telecom or Deutsche Telekom in Germany. You've got 3 or 4 large American firms, AT&T, Verizon, Tata, Tech Mahindra in India, NTT in Japan. So there are a dozen or so global recognized telecommunication firms that provide most of that global networking support for the enterprise. But there's a whole new wave of providers coming to fruition as we are going through this latest revolution of network technology transformation, arguably the greatest piece of technology transformation in the network space in the last 30 years since the uncoupling of the Bell system in the States and the PTTs here. All kinds of new competitors are popping up, whether it be traditional sourcing firms in the management layer or new niche connectivity firms at the last mile layer. So the carriers are facing this intense pressure right now to look after their embedded estate that they've grown over the last 100 years, while these new competitors are sort of snapping at them from 2 different levels: who wants to manage the enterprise network and who wants to own the last mile. So it's really not about the transport anymore. So and then you combine that with everything as a service, everything in the cloud. Every enterprise is going through their digital transformation. So they have to ask those questions. How are you going to network in the future? Because it will be different than it is today.
Yeah. And do you think the clients that we work with are ready for this big transformational change, billions of devices connected together? Do they have the network expertise? Do they have the network planning? Are they equipped to handle the change that's coming?
Boy, great question. Varying degrees. And the listeners are probably all shaking their head or nodding their head. Boy, where am I in that network technology transformation? We have clients that are very astute, very far down their transformational path. They know what they need to do. They're beginning to build their future models, their investment models, their technology migration models, their provider models, and how that's all going to work. But conversely, we have a provider who's yet to put his or her big toe in the water, and they're scared to death. So they're single-threaded with the same provider they've had forever, and they're not quite sure what network technology transformation means to me. How do I get there? So it's everywhere in the spectrum, which creates unique risks for those enterprises, but it also creates unique opportunities to rethink the network estate in every enterprise.
And I know, and without giving an ISG sales pitch, because this isn't what we're here to do, how do you, when we go into businesses, how do we help them understand what they're doing well, what their challenges are, and what their opportunities are? And part of that's presumably commercially driven, and part of it might be technically or architecturally driven. What's the sort of how does that work, John? And what sort of benefits are we able to find?
We go into clients and it's helping them actually understand where they are in that process. Most of the European clients are coming from legacy outsource contracts. They're normally on their 2nd or 3rd generation outsource contract, and with SD1 technologies,
just explain SD1.
SD1 is software-defined wide area network. And the logic and the control of networks today in a traditional wide area network is actually within the devices that are on client sites, that are in data centers, and each box needs to be physically touched, updated and configured, which is extremely lengthy process. It's extremely complex. To make changes, you actually have to touch every single device in your network.
Right.
Moving to a software-defined WAN, we actually take that logic out and hold it centrally. So the software centrally runs with an orchestrator and then can actually push out the commands, the routing protocols, the routing tables, etc., and security to the remote devices with the push of one button.
Right.
So we've segregated, should we say, the physical network, be it your router, your box in your office block, for example, and the cable in the ground.
Yeah.
We've disaggregated that and put a software layer over the top, which creates the virtual network.
Right.
Most of the organizations are actually looking at how to leverage those capabilities, because today you sign up with, say, British Telecom, AT&T, they run your boxes, they run the cables in the ground, and it's a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
With software-defined WANs, it completely changes that model in that you can take commodity services, i.e. the cables in the ground. There's little value that a telco can add to them, so you can actually purchase those directly, and then place a software layer over the top, which means you can actually, in a way, disconnect or remove control of your data network from the global providers. You could theoretically now run that yourself.
Get more flexibility.
So, and the companies are actually looking at what is the benefit, what model works for them.
Yeah.
You can have regional bandwidth providers, which gives you best-in-class pricing at a regional level, but you have more commercial overheads managing those contracts of the service providers.
Yeah.
So it's a case of working with clients to have them understand which operating models optimal for them, which commercial models optimal, even the sourcing model. Like I say, do you go for 4 global providers or do you go for 2 global providers?
Right.
It's working with the clients through each of those scenarios to see which scenario fits that organisation. No 2 organisations are the same.
Yeah.
So it's a case of working through the process to help them understand what would work best for them.
Yeah.
It's a great comment, John, and Barry, to jump in here. Every solution is bespoke today, right? The networks of old were all standards-based. The carriers all had 6 nines of technology, and it was a function of a proposal and a price and a negotiation. Today, technology solutions are bespoke. A piece of research we did not too long ago suggested that 18 months ago, less than 10% of the enterprises in the marketplace were assessing their technology migration plans. Today, that's over 80%. Wow. So in a network sourcing organization that does a couple of hundred engagements a year globally, 80% of those enterprises are approaching us to do an assessment of where they should go first. Mm-hmm. Exactly what John said. It's not about which carrier's at which price. Now it's about who manages it, what's the technology layer, what are my options, how do I get there, how do I plan to get there, how long does it take me to get there. So the smart client is rationalizing their current pricing against market for their existing network, but they're also beginning to assess the journey of where they need to be.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was a CIO of a large company in the United States, couple of billion in revenue. And he said, Phil, I can't afford to make the technology pivot right now, but I need to renegotiate my contract. And I said, that's great, but you might not be the executive making the decision next time if you don't start thinking about your digital transformation. Mm. So from a recommendation perspective, when clients call John and his team in, and the folks that do that work for us in the States, it's about the assessment. Where are you? Where are you trying to be? What are you doing in your digital model today? What's your company's digital transformation look like? And then aligning that game plan for moving forward. You have to have a roadmap for your journey.
Yeah, I mean the network is the foundation for me of your digital transformation, right? If you haven't got that right at the right speeds, available at any time, whenever you need it, that it hasn't got the right, or if it hasn't got the right security levels on it, then nothing else is going to work, right? You have to have the devices able to connect to each other as and when you want them.
We're a little bit biased in what John and I do for a living, but if you think about what gets you into the boardroom today, it's still security number one.
Yeah.
Right? But network technology transformation is arguably the second most important thing in an IT executive's.
See, that's really interesting. And that wouldn't have been the case like even a few
2 or 3 years ago.
Exactly.
And that's part of the challenge that we see in the space today. Typical IT leadership hasn't been, they aren't network people per se. The great CIO knows a lot about everything, but they haven't been grounded in the network. They didn't come from the network space.
Yeah.
They came from other places, especially on the security side.
Yeah.
So enterprises are having to catch up in a hurry. There's a dearth of skilled folks in the industry that creates support or creates resourcing challenges both in the enterprise and the carrier space. So it like I said before, it creates some interesting risks and opportunities for both the enterprise and the provider.
Yeah. And how do you measure how successful a successful enterprise network operation is? Is it because it used to be we had 99.999% availability and that type of thing, and isn't that now a given? Do you therefore measure from a technical perspective bandwidth and speed and response time and number of incidents and all that type of stuff? But can you also link KPIs to business performance because it's directly enabling customers?
It's a great question, right? I mean, it used to be bandwidth availability, SLAs, purely a technical view of the network. And you could report on that as a provider, and you could manage that as a consultant or manage that as the enterprise. But today, with everything as a service, everything in the cloud, and every enterprise thinking about their digital pivot, the KPIs absolutely tie back. So I was in a large city in Europe not too long ago in one of the largest museums in Europe, and we popped downstairs in this museum to get something to drink from one of the largest fast food retailers in the world, right? And they have digitized their buying experience, right, as to how quickly you can get a Coke or a piece of food as a KPI relative to how successful their technology migration is. Right. So it really does tie back to what's the outcome of that business, their business as a service, and what are they trying to accomplish.
It's also agility, flexibility, speed of change, being able to actually accommodate the business requirements. We see the compute areas changing, people using cloud services now, enterprises using public cloud. They then have the challenges with multi-cloud, where they're hosting in Amazon and they're hosting in AWS, and how do they actually connect all of these instances together? So it's having that agility and flexibility, but ultimately I think it should, or it pretty much is, on the end user experience. It should just be seamless. Everybody just expects the network to be there.
Exactly.
It's like you turn the light on, the light turns on. You turn the network on, the network works. So as long as the end users get a decent response time, they get access to any of their applications anytime, any place, anywhere, so to speak, they're happy. No one in my experience has ever rung up the network operations center and said, wow, your network's performing brilliantly. It's a case of they just expect it to work brilliantly, and you'll only hear when it isn't.
Correct.
So it's managing that business expectations, executive.
There are no heroes in the network.
But when it doesn't work, right, it can have huge implications and huge business implications, because we are now living in a hyper-connected digital world. If I can't take payments over my payment system, if I can't take cash into my tills, if I can't get orders in my fast food restaurant, all because of the network, that has huge implications. So getting the contracts right between network providers and clients and that entire supply chain is a complex and a very important task, right?
Well, and that's what's interesting about the technology transformation that we're going through. In days past, it was find a global network provider, give them 80% of your network, back it up with a secondary network provider, connect the data centers, those kinds of things. And that was sort of the strategy du jour. With the technology migration today, clients are having to rethink how they connect with their clients. Are you in retail? You connect differently than manufacturing, differently than an airline, differently than public sector, whatever the case may be. How are you connecting with your client base? And because each of these solutions from each of the providers is largely bespoke, not standards-based, created from the ground up, again, it creates great risk that the enterprise understand what they're doing and having a plan to take themselves on that journey. We're having to help to do it, right? Because they're not going to, there's not a standard, you can't go out and buy the book that says, here's how you implement SD1 to have a successful retail experience.
Interesting. Okay, let's turn the topic over to 5G, because we've all now heard about 5G, and there was I don't even remember 1G, but I'm sure there was 1G and then 2, and then there was 3, and 4 made a big difference from 3, as I think, John, you said earlier. But I'm told, if I believe Kevin Bacon and the EE adverts and the hype, that 5G is going to completely transform my life. I'm going to be able to download movies in seconds. I'm going to have real-time video everywhere and on anything. I'm going to be able to connect with everything at any time incredibly quickly. Even though the battery life of my iPhone is going to last much, much longer because it requires much less capacity. Is that true? Should we be excited? When is it rolled out? What's happening with 5G?
We should certainly be excited. EE have started their rollout of 5G. I haven't actually experienced it myself yet, being on a 4G mobile. But it opens up the opportunities for such high speed connectivity. You can have, like say, real life streaming video on a day-to-day basis. I think personally, for myself as a consumer, downloading films very occasionally, I doubt it will make that much benefit to my life. But then when you look at the appliances you can use it for, such as smart cities, driverless cars, will be using 5G for tracking purposes and edge computing. When you start coming into that, with the amount of data that can be generated and transmitted now with 5G, we're going to have to start moving things to the edge of the cloud. Because, again, the infrastructure inside the cloud goes back to the fibre optics and the glass and everything. There's only so much capacity there. And as we generate more and more data on the edge with 5G and ultra-high definition video streaming between users, for example, we've got to find a way of actually processing that data, which would itself lend to moving to the edge.
So we need more computing power, hence edge computing, rather than this centralized model of cloud computing.
Trying to back all that data into the cloud.
But as important as that is, the ability to actually deliver the service successfully and on a robust basis globally is still not there yet. Right. For example, we were at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona this spring. And there was something like 3,000 providers there talking about all the cool things that they do. And 2,999 of them were talking about 5G somehow in their, in their presentations about where it's going. It certainly, as John said, it is the wave of the future, and it's going to have a massive impact on what we're doing. But the enterprise decision maker that's looking at going through network technology migration right now isn't able to leverage a robust 5G solution today as part of that game plan.
So how long will it be, do you think, before the businesses that we work with will be able to leverage a robust 5G network?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on who you ask, right? If you ask some of the large providers, it's just right around the corner. But there's a provider in the States that's talking about how great their 5G solution is, but their first rollouts did not go very successful. Right? Then if you look at what the enterprise has to contemplate right now, I don't know that anybody, John, you can jump in here, I don't know that anybody we're talking to is putting 5G in front of SD1 or anything else that they're doing. So there are steps along the migration, along the journey, and 5G will certainly be a part of it, and it will be a robust add-on to a network technology migration, but I don't think it's first in line right now.
I'd say 12 to 18 months. I can especially see it taking off in retail. If you think retail, their margins are so tight at the moment, they're normally running on low-grade DSL, broadband-type connections. It would be a perfect application for them, put it in shops. You can have your tills run off the 5G. You can have all sorts of small appliances. Local area networks in offices in London, for example, could theoretically move to 5G.
Yeah.
You also move that with the SD1. SD1 is, should we say, carrier agnostic. It doesn't actually care whether it's using fibre, copper, MPLS, frame relay, because it sits over the top of those.
Yes.
So 5G would also be used for that. It would be an excellent redundancy and backup link.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's the possibilities are endless. It really is waiting for the providers to deploy it, and also deploy it at a commercial level where it makes sense for people and organisations to adopt it.
Yeah, absolutely. And will we see the inevitable people thinking about 6G and 7G? Where does it stop? What's the future hold?
Well, they're already talking about 6G. Again, at the aforementioned Mobile World Congress, there were certain, big three-letter firms talking about this next generation, which, for lack of a better phrase, is 6G.
Right.
So without being, too cheeky, right? Absolutely 6G.
Yeah.
Whatever that will be defined as comes down the road. It's just the next great thing.
Yeah.
We're on network generation 12. Right, because fiber optic glass capacity continues to expand with better multiplexing equipment. So there's all those pieces, just like chip capacity, right?
Yeah,
it just
absolutely.
Keeps going
absolutely.
Going.
As I'm always telling people, digital transformation is not a project. It's a way of life. You have to continually evolve your business to make the best use of new technology.
Probably the smartest thing we've heard today. The journey never ends, right? But what's happening now is, for the third time in the last 30 years, there's a technology migration available that requires you to pull something out and put something in.
Yeah.
It's not just doing a few software clicks and fixing it for the next thing.
Absolutely.
So you have to have a game plan. You have to have a journey and an approach to get there. And it's not something that's going to happen in 90 days.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. I want to, just before we finish, when we have guests on the show, as you will know, being avid listeners of our ISG Smarktalks podcast, we ask them 5 questions. So I'm going to ask you gents 5 questions just to learn a little bit more about you both. So the first question I ask everyone is, which technology has had the biggest influence on your career and why? Let me start with you, Phil.
Well, as a network guy, I would have to say maybe it's not a technology answer, but the breakup of the Bell system and the breakup of the big PTTs in Europe that created the competitive telecommunication industry, which then spawned a lot of different technology developments where the old Bell Labs were doing their thing without a whole lot of competition, right? BT probably did the same thing, but then in competition, all the big firms jumped into action. So I'd probably say the breaking up of the Bell systems and the PTTs, which puts us in the position that we are 40 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, for myself, it has to be TCP/IP, which basically underlines the internet. I mean, that is what spurned the internet connectionless protocol. That's also given me a very healthy career for the last 20 years. So I must admit, moving from things such as frame relay to TCP/IP and MPLS, for example. So for me, it's got to be IP.
I remember it well.
Internet protocol.
Was it Transmission Control Protocol Internet Protocol?
Yes,
is that right?
Yes.
I listened. I remember. Which technology, in your opinion, has promised most but delivered least over the last however long few years? Start with you, John.
Again, going back to a networking perspective, it must be ATM networks, asynchronous transfer mode.
Okay.
They actually came in as the best thing since sliced bread to replace frame relay.
Yeah.
And it was a good technology, but it was only about for a year and a half, and it got superseded by MPLS.
Right.
So it never actually really had a chance to showcase its capabilities. It's still around today. You'll still see ATM links in places, but it's something that was released to great applaud, and then so quickly it was superseded.
Yeah.
So
excellent.
ATM.
Phil?
personal digital assistants, Palms and Blackberries.
I remember
and
those. Yeah.
Kinds of things. It's an example of a great technology concept that missed by a half a development cycle or a half a generation. We all remember our Palm Trio with the little stylus and all the things.
Absolutely.
And now we go home and they open a drawer and there's cables and there's 3 or 4 of those devices and old television.
In your man drawer.
So yeah. So the old PDA.
Excellent. A great answer. Let's, third question is on gadgets, actually. So what's your favorite gadget? Everyone likes a good gadget. Maybe yours isn't a PDA, Phil, but what's your favorite gadget?
It's my global cell phone, my global mobile device. 6 months over into the UK from the States, I live off of my new UK-based cell phone that lets me call my father or my daughter back in the States. It lets me find a client in India. It lets me run my calendar and do all the apps that I need to run my business. The train app, the tube app, all those other kinds of things. So I would be lost without my personal device. Yeah,
I think we all would. I certainly would. What about you, John?
For myself, it's probably, I'm not sure if it comes under the category of a gadget, my NAS.
Your what?
Network attached storage unit.
You're such a geek. I didn't realise you were such a geek.
I've got my whole house is wired up to a NAS, so I can basically stream films, music into any room around the house. I can even stream them into my car using my phone via those most reliable 4G signals. So it is a NAS, and it's kept my daughter entertained for years with all the Disney films you can think of, and she can watch it in any room on demand.
Great. I'd never even heard of that before. I like that. I'm going to have to get you around to my house. We could do one of those. So, penultimate question. Which technology do you think is going to have the biggest impact on business over the next decade? Either of you?
I'm gonna. We've been talking about 5G. I think that ultimately is the next great business enhancer, next great communications enhancer. People know what it's going to do. They know how it's going to work. It's just not commercially deployed in such a way that the global enterprise can take advantage of it. But when it gets here, it's going to change the way people consume data. It's going to change the way the individual. It's a B2B. It's a B2C. It's a C2C. All those plays are going to change based on what 5G does. And then the interesting thing to me is what does 6G look like then? Right. So the providers are all constantly thinking about that next generation of communication methodology.
John? For myself, I think it's going to be the continuation of virtualization. As in, we have network function virtualization, and when you can replace appliances with a software instance, the deployment's so much more straightforward. The moves had some changes. It lowers the port costs. It just makes the physical aspects of running not only global networks, data centers, computing. It just makes it so much more streamlined, easy, straightforward. So I think the continuation of virtualization.
Excellent. Good answer. And final question. Is there somebody who you've either worked alongside or worked with, who has mentored you, or maybe not someone you've even met, but someone who's had who's really a hero, a technology hero? I describe them as someone who's had an impact on your life. So, anyone spring to mind?
Interestingly, probably Lou Gershner, who used to run IBM. Because he was actually CIO at American Express when I was at American Express. So I can't claim to have met him, but I was in a room with him, which I think does count.
It rubbed off.
That surely must count. And just his direction towards IT, he did a fantastic job turning American Express round. He moved on to IBM, and as you'll probably recall, I mentioned at the beginning of this call, I also moved on to IBM. Not so much that he asked me to join the firm,
but you followed.
I followed in his footsteps to a certain extent, but just Lou Gershner for building up mainly IBM in the late 90s.
Excellent. Phil?
I'm going to get back to your TCP/IP protocol. The fathers of the internet, one of which was Dr. Vinton Cerf, who was a legend of the old MCI that broke up the Bell system in the States. And I spent the better part of 20 years there and had a wonderful opportunity on numerous occasions to spend time with Dr. Cerf and understand what he and Bob Kahn and the ARPANET team went through to create this thing where they could get the message from one room to the next. And then one state to the next, and so forth and so on. And I think many of us owe our careers to the concept to John's point, the concept of the internet. So Dr. Vinton Cerf and the ARPANET team is, always be legendary.
Wow. Isn't it interesting to think how they were sort of excited about getting messages from one place to another, and here we are talking about billions of connected devices and messages going around all over the place. So thank you, gentlemen. Fascinating insights, educational and entertaining, or at least it was entertaining for me. So a big thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in again. Please join us for our another episode of ISG Smart Talks very soon. Thank you very much.